wonder if any of you are like me. I have found over the years that I can talk a really great game when it comes to life, but if I'm honest with myself, there are a lot of moments that end up falling short. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, you know what, I'm gonna get in the best shape of my life. I'm gonna lose weight, I'm gonna dial it in, and it's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna start tomorrow. Have you ever done that? Tomorrow means that tonight you can go have pizza, right? Because you're gonna start tomorrow. But then tomorrow comes and you're like, yeah, I know what I said yesterday, but well, there's always next week, right? There's next week. It's gonna rain all week. There's always next week. I can talk a big game, but following through is something else. I remember before we had kids, I was at a grocery store in Marietta, Georgia. We were living just north of Atlanta, and I was coming home from school one day, and I stopped by a grocery store, and so I'm just sort of there, and there's this 3 or 4 year old kid, and he just falls to the ground and starts flopping around like a fish, and like he's bawling, he is screaming, just absolutely losing his mind. And in that moment, I remember looking at the parent and thinking to myself, my kids will never do that. Like, what kind of parent are you? Like, raise them right. Come on, man, get a grip. Now, you've probably thought that. And if you don't have kids, you think that now, I guarantee it. Because you can feel it when you go into a store. But then the day came we had kids. And I realized real quick, y'all, I didn't know nothing. Like, it was way harder than I ever thought it could possibly be. And I was standing in a Walmart here in this city with 2 of our 3 kids. And the middle one, who is most like me, was not getting his way. And he went full tilt, meltdown, collapsed on the floor, flopping around, bawling his eyes out, screaming. When I bent over to pick him up, he went wet noodle. If you're a parent, you know wet noodle. And as soon as you get a grip on the wet noodle, then they arch their back and make it impossible to pick them up. And so I'm right there in that moment. And I remember looking down the aisle, and there was someone looking at me exactly the way I used to look at other people. And listen, I don't normally do this because I'm a pretty quiet guy, but I was like, turn around, keep moving. It really was. Like, you know, I'm in survival mode here. You've got no idea what I'm dealing with. Do not judge me, which made the whole situation way worse. But I don't know if you're like this, but sometimes it seems like we can set some really high ideals, but then life sometimes gets in the way. When our kids were little, we were gonna limit the amount of TV they watched. Blew that. We decided we're gonna wait till high school to get them a cell phone. Blew that one too. We were gonna hold them out of contact sports until they got to middle school because I wanted to make sure they got coached by the right people. Completely blew that. And what I discovered in our life is it got worse with each new addition. Like the standard we had for our oldest son, Jack, is not even close to the standard we set for our youngest son, Luke. We were just absolutely exhausted. I mean, even the amount of pictures that we have. Like, you know, when Jack and Joe came along, there's a billion pictures. By the time we had Luke, it's like, we know what he looks like. He lives with us. You know, he knows what he looks like. We don't really need to take pictures anymore. The point I'm trying to make is, I think it's very easy to set high ideals for ourselves and then end up falling short. And the truth of the matter is, if we were all honest with ourselves, it's that way in our spiritual life as well. I think there are a lot of people who end up feeling like second-class followers of Jesus. Maybe you feel like you don't measure up, or maybe you feel like you're not good enough, or maybe you don't have things dialed in enough, or you come to church and you set really high standards for yourself, and then when you leave, it doesn't play out the way that you thought it would. And you're like, should I even go back? Like, I can't live up to the standard like they are, not realizing that we all put our best foot forward, even when we come to church. It's no different than any other area of life. It's just like social media. When you go to social media, you're seeing everybody's best marriage, their best parenting moment, their greatest success, and their biggest win. You're not seeing reality. We do the same thing when we come to church. Therefore, I think we all wrestle with some measure of tension in our lives. We're in this series called Follow Me, and some of us are struggling. We're like, follow me? I can't even follow my own advice. I'm supposed to love my enemies. I can't even love myself. I can't love my friends. I'm not doing a great job of even love my family. How in the world am I supposed to learn to love my enemies? Well, if by chance that's you, there's good news for us today. Because even when you don't live up to your own promises, or you fail to live up to your own standard, if you think you failed to live up to God's standard, God is still faithful to his promises. In fact, even when you feel like you are not enough, God's grace is more than enough. So today I want to look at a story of a guy who set some really high standards for himself, but who ended up not exactly hitting the mark. His name was Peter. And we've been looking at these people who encountered Jesus. And for all of them, Jesus ended up giving them these two powerful words. It's simply a call to follow me. And so today I want to look at Peter, not at his call to follow Jesus, but at his restoration after he failed and denied even knowing who Jesus was. And it's interesting. All four Gospels tell of the denial of Peter. We're going to start in Mark and we're going to end in John. So when we get to Mark, it's Thursday of the final week of Jesus' life. And he's gathered together with his friends and they're sharing what we call the Last Supper. And so Jesus is about to be arrested and crucified. And just before that moment, he gets his best friends together and they share this meal. And at one point, he tells them this in Mark chapter 14. On the way, Jesus told them, all of you will desert me. For the scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there. Now, this would have been shocking news because for every one of these disciples, they had gotten the call to follow me. And that's exactly what they did. They left their jobs, they left their families, they left their future, all to go follow this young rabbi. And so when he's telling them, you're all going to desert me, they get all up in their emotions. Especially Peter. Verse 29, Peter said to him, even if everyone else deserts you, I never will. Jesus replied, to tell you the truth, Peter, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me. No, Peter declared emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I'll never deny you. All the others vowed the same. Let me tell you what Peter's doing right here. Peter is making a promise in his heart, not yet realizing it is a promise that he absolutely cannot keep. John tells us about that moment of denial. In John chapter 18, verse 15, he says this, Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. And one of the things that drives me crazy about John is the other disciple. And so when he speaks about himself, he's speaking in third person. It's a little weird. So Simon, Peter, and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple, see, it's weird, was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you? She asked Peter. He replied, I am not. It was cold and the servants and officials stood around a fire that they had made to keep warm. Now, hang on to that. They built a fire. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. So they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, didn't I see you with him in the garden? Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow. What we're going to see is that Peter has to learn to walk in the grace of God. Notice who set the high standard. Jesus didn't set the standard, if you were listening closely. Jesus is like, here's what's gonna happen. You're all gonna find yourself in a moment where you're gonna desert me, but it's okay, I'm gonna meet you in Galilee. Like that was the standard. I'm gonna tell you like it is. And they're all like, no, we would never desert you. See, they are the ones that set the high standard, not Jesus. So what about you? Do you ever come to church and you sit here and at some point maybe you get convicted about something and you're like, you know what? I'm never gonna gossip again. Like I'm just not gonna do it. I'm never gonna gossip again. And you're super strong until like Monday. When you go to work or you go to school and somebody's got something juicy and you're right back in it, right? Or maybe you come and you feel that conviction. I am never gonna lose my cool again. And then somebody cuts you off when you're trying to turn out of the church parking lot, right? I'm gonna read my Bible and pray every day. It's gonna be different this time. And then Wednesday comes along and you're like, wow, it's Wednesday. I completely forgot. Look, we often make big promises and we talk a big game and ultimately we don't follow through. It is the human condition. And listen, God knows that about us and God chooses to love us anyway. Just like Peter, he knew. That's why he was like, Peter, you're gonna desert me, but I'm gonna meet you in Galilee. So what we learn through this story of Peter is that grace not only redeems us, but grace can restore us. Because here's the truth about all of us. We all need grace. And I am convinced as we learn to embrace that grace, we will find a deeper sense of love in our lives. That's the challenge I see in this story, is you and I have got to learn to lean into grace. Last week when we had all the wind and the storms, one of our neighbors had a tree that blew down and it took out the power lines, but only to his house and 4 others, one of which was mine. And it was out for like 8 hours. And I don't know what your house is like, but when our power goes out for that long, it gets crazy town in a hurry, right? Like you can't make coffee, you can't cook any food, there's no TV, there's no internet, there's complete silence. And I would stand out on my porch waiting for a truck to come, and I would see that all my other neighbors had power, and it was literally just driving me nuts. Now, what made it bad was when we moved to this house, it had an alarm, right? Little box in the den, but we never hooked it up. So like we never use it. In fact, I don't even think about it being there until the power goes out. So it's wired in, hardwired in, so it runs on electricity, but it's also got this battery, and it's one of those goofy, big square batteries, and it's in the garage. And for months, every once in a while, it'll beep as a reminder of, yo, you need to go change this battery. And every time it beeps, I just hit quiet, and then I go on about my life. So the power's out. It was fine for the first hour, but then all of a sudden, because that battery was draining, we started getting this loud noise every 15 seconds. When I say loud, I'm talking like screeching, hair on the back of your neck. I gotta make this stop. And it went on every 15 seconds. And so finally I was like, I can't take this, it's already dark. I go downstairs, I'm gonna go in the garage, I'm gonna take that battery out, I'm gonna rip whatever I got to rip to make this stupid thing stop. And so the first thing I did when I got in the garage is I hit the garage door opener, right? Why do we do that? Have you ever thought about that? As soon as the power goes out, we're flipping light switches like crazy. Maybe it just shows the power of habits, I don't know. But I go out, I hit the garage door, and I go over to the battery, and just as I'm about to disconnect it, the electricity finally comes back on. And y'all, listen, it was like Christmas morning. I raced upstairs, I made coffee, it's like 10 o'clock at night. I'm turning on all the lights, turning on all the TVs, make sure it works. It was absolutely awesome. But it reminded me that in that moment that, man, like everything in my house is literally made to run on electricity. And without that electricity, nothing really works like it's supposed to. The same thing is true with our spiritual lives. We are made to run on the grace and mercy of God in Jesus Christ. And I promise you, if you try to live your life apart from that grace, you're not gonna make it very far. In fact, you're gonna get frustrated and you're gonna wanna give up. And there's gonna be this voice in the back of your mind telling you it is time to quit. Why? Because you're gonna consistently fail, not only yourself, but you'll fail to meet the expectations God has set. Aren't you glad you came to church today? You're failing, all of us. But there's another side to that. When you lean in, you remember it was grace that got you where you are right now. The undeserved, unmerited favor and forgiveness of God. You didn't deserve it the first time you got it. None of us deserve it today, and we won't deserve it tomorrow. And so you might as well just receive it and live in it and celebrate it and be like, yeah, I'm a mess, but I'm God's mess, and he's got my back. And because he's got my back, I'm gonna do what I can to keep following him. It's grace. See, remember, it was, if you're gonna clap, y'all, 'cause I'm about to really get going here, okay? Remember, it was grace that sent Jesus to the cross for our sins. It was grace that raised him up again to rule and to reign. It was his grace that sent his Spirit to be our counselor and our advocate. It was his grace that turns us from enemies of God into friends of God. It's grace that gives us a new future. It is grace that brings us a greater purpose. And it is grace that gives us the power to do what we were actually called to do. Grace not only gives us a new life, but grace itself empowers us to live that new life. And so without grace, it's like trying to do your life without power. It's gonna be frustrating and limiting. Again, we all need grace, which is why I'm thankful for John. All four Gospels tell us about Peter's denial and failure, but it is only John that tells us about his restoration. So when we come to John, it's after the resurrection. The disciples have gone back to their way of living because they thought the movement was over. Jesus shows up on the shore. The disciples see him, and so Peter, being Peter, jumps out of the boat, swims to shore to meet Jesus. All the other disciples are like, yo, we'll pick everything up. We'll bring the boat in. You just go do you, Peter. And when he gets to shore, Jesus is there, and he's cooking breakfast. And John says he's using a charcoal fire to cook the breakfast. Now, the last time a fire was mentioned, it was when Peter was standing there warming himself. And that's the moment he denied Jesus 3 times. And I cannot help but wonder if Peter doesn't look at that same kind of fire and then remember all that big talk. I'll never abandon you. In fact, if I have to lay my life down, I'll never deny you. And then immediately followed by failure, not once, but 3 times. After they eat, Jesus pulls Peter aside for a conversation. And in typical fashion, he starts with a question. Here it is, John 21, verse 15. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. So that's like Stephen, Brent, DeFur, right? Simon, son of John. This is gonna be a conversation right here. Do you love me more than these? Talking about the other disciples. Yes, Lord, Peter replied, you know I love you. Then feed my lambs. Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know that I love you, and take care of my sheep. A 3rd time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a 3rd time. Remember, it was Peter that set the high standard. It was Peter that denied Jesus 3 times, and yet it's Peter that's hurt because Jesus would ask him the question. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my sheep. 3 times, Jesus asked the same question. 3 times, Peter denied him. It's not until that third time when Peter finally comes to the end of himself. He says, Lord, you know everything. Like, I did exactly what you told me I was gonna do. I should have listened to you. It's Peter's acknowledgement that he's gone as far as he can go, and he's gotta depend on grace. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Notice what Jesus does not do here. He does not scold him. He does not remind him of every failure. He restores him, right? And he gives him an actual directive. He gives him a purpose. Feed my lambs. That's just another way of saying, love people. I think there's a lesson in this for all of us. If you want to grow in your faith and increase your influence, if you want to lead people, you got to love people. There's no way around it. If you want to rise up to a place of influence, you got to be willing to bend low and serve the needs of others. If you want to grow in your knowledge and faith in God, you got to grow your heart toward other people. See, faith is less about the big moments of passion, and it is more about learning to live a lifetime of compassion. That's the point that Jesus is trying to make. He knew everything that Peter was going to do, and he chose to love him anyway. Even though he failed miserably, there was still a purpose and a plan for his life. It did not end right there on the beach. John 21, verse 18. I tell you the truth. When you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, here it is, follow me. Jesus was bringing restoration. It was a grace moment. There was nothing that Peter did that was impressive or that made it seem like it was his right to be restored. It's God coming in his brokenness at his worst moment, at that moment where he fell flat on his face and picking him up and saying, Peter, it's okay. My grace is sufficient for you. Your life did not end in the denial. No, my Father's got a plan for your life. And history tells us that Peter went on and he preached and he taught and he planted churches and he stood up for the good news of the gospel. And literally thousands and thousands of people became followers of Jesus, all the way to the point that it got him in trouble, which is what Jesus is referencing. Because Peter too found himself in a place where he was asked to deny the gospel or lose his life, and he chose death. And in that day it was crucifixion. But Peter, because he had been overwhelmed by God's grace, he made sure that he was not crucified the same way Jesus was. In fact, he begged to be crucified upside down. That was the stretching of his hands. That was the leading to the place that he did not want to go. And history tells us that Peter was crucified upside down. Y'all listen. Even when you are not enough, God's grace is enough. So even if you're here today and you feel like you failed, or you're thinking to yourself, man, I've blown it, or I've made too many mistakes, I want you to come back to the same question Peter was confronted with. Do you love me? See, that's grace. Jesus could have turned his back on him, but he did not. I don't know of a greater failure in life than failing to acknowledge who Jesus is. And yet he saw through that. He told him, you're gonna go do this, but it's okay. I'm gonna see you in Galilee. Do you love me? See, when you get off track, it always goes back to love. Listen, none of us are perfect. And we've got to stop setting that expectation for ourselves. That's why we talk about next steps and never talk about perfection. All of us are a mess at some point in our life. All of us make mistakes. All of us fall short. All of us fail to meet everybody else's expectation. So the goal is, can I take my next step? Can I just do the next right thing and meet God there and then let God grow me into the person that he needs me to be? Do you love me? That's the question. If you love me, then go love other people. And I promise you, it's why Jesus boiled everything down to those two statements. Love God, love people. We add, share hope. If you'll do those three things, you're gonna get your life right. And in the end, you're gonna live a fruitful life that impacts other people. So this week, when you fail, it's okay. Invite God into the process of that failure. Pick yourself back up and go love somebody. When you find yourself afraid and at a place where you don't have answers, just go love somebody. When you feel like you're weak and you need a good dose of strength, go out and love somebody. Even when you feel like God is somewhere else on the other side of the universe and is completely oblivious about what's going on in your life, it's okay. He's still there. Go love somebody anyway. That's the point. It's God's grace, and it's right there for the taking. You can't beg for it. You can't borrow it. You cannot steal it from somebody else. You simply have to receive it. And so as we make our way toward Easter, I want you to wrestle with that concept of, am I accepting God's grace in my life? Do I have enough situational awareness to know that I can't do this on my own? And I want to ask you to take that area of your life that maybe you've been protecting for yourself. It's that failure. It's that mistake. It's that decision. It's that voice speaks in the back of your mind. It's that hidden fear. It's that addiction. It's that sin you've kept secret. Whatever it is, it's holding you back from experiencing God's grace. I want to challenge you to just let it go today. Just today. Don't set a standard too high. Just shoot for the next 24 hours. And tomorrow morning when you wake up, ask for God's grace again. And then you do that the next day, and you do that the next day. And what you'll find over time is you're going to become stronger. And your confidence is going to grow. And you're going to grow in your trust. And you're going to know that God has got your back. And that's when you can begin to make real change. And so listen, we got a couple of minutes, so the band's going to come out. And we're going to sing one last song. And I want you to know that the altars of our church are always open. It's not that you got to come down front, but I want you to know you can. Because some of us are like me. You're going to sit there and you're going to make a commitment to yourself. And if you don't come down front and kind of go public with it, you're going to forget about it by the time you get out in your car. So maybe that's a moment you want to share here. You can also make an altar out of wherever it is you're sitting right now. This is that chance for us to pump the brakes, to catch our breath for the first time, maybe in a long time, and to just sit in the presence of the Holy Spirit. I don't know what it is you're wrestling with, but God does. So maybe it's just that moment of saying, God, here's this thing, and I do love you, and I need you to help me wrestle through this. I need your grace. I need your mercy. I need your compassion. You can do that right now. It's the beauty of our faith. It's your moment with God. And so I'm going to ask you if you would to stand and sing. So if some folks want to come down front, makes it a little easier for them to get out. If you need to leave, I totally get it. Just leave quietly out back. But if you're in a good spot in your life, man, when we sing this song, give it all you got. Just step out in faith and let's celebrate God.